Next, I'd like to call up Regina Chigazola.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo some of the things that were said by Golden State Salmon Association and the environmental groups earlier. I really appreciate everyone who's been speaking up for the voluntary agreements. There's nothing to do with healthy rivers within it, so I'm not going to call it that. And I understand the want and need for consensus, but these processes have been going on for since 2018, as far as I know. And meanwhile, we've lost about 60 to 90% of the salmon and all of the Delta smelt. And I just really think that we need to think about what balancing and really means. If you're coming from a baseline where communities of color and tribes and salmon in the ecosystem and clean water haven't been considered. And I know that, the board is trying to consider them now, but in the past they have not. Then, and you're talking about compromise and balances, like we've compromised so much. We've compromised so much that we're facing an extinction crisis, that tribes don't have fish for ceremonies, that we feel like we go to these meetings and it's just banging our heads against the wall. Like you can see, people aren't showing up in the same way that they did throughout the many last years because they don't feel like anyone cares about the points of view of the people who are advocating for a healthy delta, or to make sure that communities can have access to clean water within that delta. um, of course, I want to make sure that all of the cities have access to water, but in the end, agriculture is going to have to use less water. It doesn't even matter if, the Delta Plan doesn't move forward and we just allow voluntary agreements that aren't going to do what we need to do. It's climate change is real. People are going to have to use less water, and ag takes the lion's share of the water. So I think we can talk about how we serve so many people, everyone, how we serve so many people and this and that. But we're coming from a place of deficiency. We're coming from a place of extinction. We're coming from a place of having toxic algae and dirty water and tons of chemicals in the water. And we need habitat, but we need flow. We need a baseline. We need regulation. It cannot only be lots and lots of meetings and agreements. And, I think people should definitely continue to meet, and if agreements can hit those hard regulations, then that's wonderful, But in the end, I just want to say that, the job of the water board is not to make everyone happy. It's to protect beneficial uses in clean water. And if the salmon go extinct on your watch, that's something that, you're going to have to tell your grandkids about, and if native people don't have access to salmon anymore and fishermen don't have boats or jobs anymore, that's something that is going to happen on your watch. And, so we can say, oh, well, the people who don't want large scale salmon extinction and toxic water are NIMBYs, but they're not. They're environmental justice communities, and they're people who actually care about the continuation of having a delta that functions in clean water. So to listen to like the outrageous insults on the concerns of the people who have been not listened to for so many years and like locked out of rooms by people whose bottom line is money has just really hurt me after years of being in these meetings today. And it hurts me that my son is not going to go fishing and he doesn't know what it's like. He's not going to know what it's like to have clean water, because if we don't take action now, and he won't be able to go out on fishing boats or to know his local fishermen. This is ways of life that are ending and have been ending while this process is going for thousands and thousands and thousands of people whose points of view have never been considered. And that's not NIMBYism. And that's environmental justice. And it's trying to make sure there's a future for life in the Delta. And that, there's an equal baseline for everyone. So anyway, I'm going to stop now because I don't want to go over my time. And I am very frustrated after a long day of feeling insulted. But I just want to say your job is to protect clean water. If there can be voluntary agreements that actually meet baseline flows, then great. But if not, then we shouldn't go forward with it. And that's my opinion. Not just my opinion, but that's, looking at the law and the responsibilities. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Next, I'd like to call up Dave Warner.
Hey, I'm Dave Warner, resident of Palo Alto. Thank you for your service. You all have quite the important job. What you're doing is vital for our rivers and delta. Thank you for all the passion you put into it. The decisions you're weighing here, as you know, will impact generations. I've been around a while. I was in high school in Orange County when the State Water Project first delivered water to Southern California in 1973. Admittedly, I was not cognizant of your board being formed in 1967, but what a great thing, up there with the Coastal Commission and with the California Air Resources Board, CARB. I'd like to draw a parallel between what you're doing and what Mary Nichols and all the wonderful people at CARB have done for our air. So many of us from my generation remember how bad the air was in Los Angeles, in the LA basin. One of my worst memories was landing at LAX in the early 90s into a thick brown haze. Today, I can't get over how much cleaner the air is in Southern California. So many days now, I can actually see the LA basin that is actually a basin surrounded by mountains. You have the same opportunity as Mary Nichols and CARB. And you and your predecessors have done so much so far, including building your 2010 foundational scientific report for the Bay Delta Plan and enacting the Bay Delta Plan in 2018 and all the work you're doing now. I hope you can bring our rivers and delta back to life, similar to what CARB has done for our air. As you're weighing your decisions, I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. We humans are remarkably resilient. As you know, drinking recycled water has caught on like fire in Southern California, not to mention other local sourcing activities such as Los Angeles's Measure W. Flora and fauna, not so much in terms of resilience. We haven't seen CDFW Tuolumne salmon escapement counts exceed 2,000, which is awfully low number, now for 20 years in a row. Prior to that, counts fluctuated wildly, but between 1952 and 2003, they averaged 10,000 a year. The flora and fauna, bears, salmon, frogs, to name a few, need your help much more than the humans. If you have to lean more one way or the other, I hope you'll lean towards the flora and the fauna. My other point is that I hope you'll follow widely accepted science when making your decisions, which might make your decisions simpler. And when the science is uncertain, your adaptive management feature is a very powerful solution. Please decide it in favor of our future generations having thriving rivers just like my kids are experiencing today with much cleaner air. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up, double check, Martin Gothberg.
Hi, thank you all for your time. My name is Martin Gothberg, and I live in Santa Clara. I have some general comments about the Bay Delta Plan Phase 2. I've followed state efforts to update the plan since before 2018 when I spoke at the Merced hearing. That was the same hearing where many politicians vented their views, including one who threatened to unleash the dogs of war. Thankfully today, since 9 o'clock as I've been listening to information that points to accountability. So maybe someone unleashed the dogs of therapy instead. That's a good thing. I'd like to see California implement the plan without unnecessary delay and allow greater unimpaired flow in our rivers, including the Tuolumne. Our salmon and many other species are at grave risk after decades of delay. VAs are incremental, complex, undermine the flows specified in the Bay Delta Plan and are inherently slow to implement, which may run out the clock on achieving a healthy salmon-based ecosystem. I'm highly skeptical, as others are, at how effective VAs would be at achieving necessary flows for fish and wildlife. It looks like a shell game to me. I get that balancing flow for all beneficial uses of water is challenging. Yet as a consumer of food and water, I see huge inefficiencies in how we use this public trust resource. With greater unimpaired flow for rivers, the worst case is not that we will face extreme shortage of water for households in dry years. Rather, a worst case may be that all of us will be forced to quickly become more efficient in how we use water in times of drought. Lastly, I always like to remind everyone what I hope is obvious, that habitat restoration without floodplain inundation makes little difference to salmon and steelhead. Again, thank you for your time and all your work that you are doing. I echo everyone who has come before me who thanks you.
Next, I'd like to call up Nancy Arbuckle. Ms. Arbuckle.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My goal today is not just to speak, but to be heard. My name's Nancy Arbuckle. I live in San Francisco. I read Cadillac Desert in 1986 when it came out, and I've been following California water policy ever since. Water, the most precious commodity on earth, is in California a story of waste, loss, and now extinction. I'm here to say it doesn't have to be this way. Let me remind you of three relevant facts. One, you, the state water board, are not beholden to the irrigation districts or the water agencies or even the governor. Two, you are not a political entity. And three, you are an independent board, a powerful regulatory body with a job to do. So why haven't you done it? Ask yourselves, have we ceded our power to the irrigation districts and their lobbyists and to the governor in his quest for higher office? And how do you reconcile yourselves to the fact that you're giving 80% of our precious water to big ag so they can sell subsidized agricultural products to China? The Chinese aren't dumb. They are essentially buying grossly underpriced water instead of using their own. You can use all the jargon you want today, HRLs, all that. But when it comes to California's water resources and drinking water, your mission statement says it all. 1, preserve. 2, enhance. 3, restore for the benefit of present and future generations. I ask you, are you succeeding in your purpose? The latest shiny object diverting everyone's attention are the VAs, the HR&L, whatever it's being called today. These are simply an excuse for inaction, a pretend policy, and a diversionary tactic. It's long past time for you to act in alignment with your mission. I'm asking you to do your job, and I will spell it out as others have done. Update the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta, finish what you started. Adopt a program of implementation that significantly increases unimpaired flow requirements. Monitor and enforce compliance. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up Peter Dreckmeyer.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. Long day. And thank you all board members and staff. Peter Dreckmeyer, I'm the Policy Director for Tuolumne River Trust. I want to acknowledge that you have inherited a big challenge, to say the least, in part because previous boards weren't willing to make hard decisions. I hope this board will break that cycle and not just kick the can down the road, because we really are running out of time. I attended my first Bay Delta Plan hearing in 2013, 12 years ago. So water diverters have had 12 years, and actually a lot more time than that, to demonstrate they can implement real solutions for restoring ecosystems. Yet conditions have continued to get worse. Salmon fishing has been closed for the past 2 seasons, and we're waiting to see what will happen this year. It's imperative that the diverters be invested in real solutions and not just checking things off a list. The Bay Delta Plan, with biological goals and adaptive management, is the right approach. We face a tragedy of the commons of immense proportion. For decades, water diverters have taken what they could get away with, exceeding the carrying capacities of our waterways, and ecosystems have paid the price, and the natural resource debt will be passed on to future generations. Earth's biosphere is our ultimate infrastructure. The fact that it's in such dire straits doesn't bode well for the future of our species. The other species we're trying to protect and restore are the canaries in the coal mine. We owe it to future generations to give them a fighting chance. We'll soon have a president who wants to drill, 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 and irrigate, irrigate, irrigate. There will be minimal checks and balances. Republican senators are feeling hard-pressed to reject even the worst of the least qualified nominees for cabinet member positions. To elect a somewhat decent majority leader, Republican senators needed to have a secret ballot so that Trump wouldn't know who to punish. I encourage you to ask yourselves, how would you vote on the Bay Delta Plan versus voluntary agreements if there were no risk of repercussions from the governor? Please base your decisions on facts and science and vote your conscience. I encourage you to make your top immediate priority being to flesh out the program of implementation for the Bay Delta Plan. Thank you very much for your time.
Next, I'd like to call up Mark Moulton. Next, then we'll go to Stephen Rosenblum.
Good evening, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. It's been a long day, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to echo some comments that people have said today. Under state and federal law, the board must set water quality standards and a program of implementation that protects the Bay Delta and the fish and wildlife it supports. Agriculture uses 80% of the water in our state, but only produces 10% of the state's GDP. The use of our scarce water by agriculture needs to be carefully evaluated to be sure that it's being used in the best way for all Californians. It's not possible to argue that reasonable protection is being achieved when native fish and wildlife populations are crashing, and the salmon fishery has been closed 3 times in the last 15 years. And toxic algae blooms threaten the health of humans and pets in the Delta. Reduced flows are really the culprit. They result in lethal water temperatures, which facilitate those blooms and interfere with fish migrations. Best available science shows that population viability of native fish and the health of their ecosystems is strongly linked to the amount and timing of fresh water flow. The voluntary agreements can help with the habitat, but in the absence of sufficient flow, they do not do the job, and that science has demonstrated. If the board does not accept the Bay Delta plan with sufficient flows, it would delay the attainment of the salmon fish and doubling objective to 2050. And it also excludes the tribal environmental justice and Delta interests from the table. The board should adopt a program of implementation that requires all water users to meet flow requirements that achieve salmon doubling, native fish viability, and other water quality objectives by dramatically increasing flows to and through the Delta to San Francisco Bay. Thank you for your attention.
Next, I'd like to call up Tanya Soul.
Hello, I am Tanya Soleil from the San Francisco Bay Area. I am sorry that unlike in the past, I am unable to be in Sacramento to make my comments in person. Nonetheless, I am calling in because I strongly believe that the voluntary agreements will not, I repeat, will not be sufficient to protect California's ecosystem water needs. Because as I found out when I started attending these meetings, fresh water is not just necessary for humans, but also flora and fauna. Basically entire ecosystems. Back then, I was actually annoyed at the focus on fish. I just could not understand it. I didn't really care about fish. But with a little bit of further education, I found out that bears need to eat not only berries, but also fish. Today, I understand how critical fish are for ecosystem health. For most of us, in addition to our own water needs, we acknowledge and want to ensure fresh water for our favorite flowers and animals. But we forget that a healthy ecosystem is a very delicately balanced system and impacts the flora and fauna that are not on our favorites list can be as profound as on those that we do care about. And as Peter Druckmeyer from the Tuolumne Trust just mentioned, a final thought in today's post-election environment is I really would hope that you, the board members, would vote in accordance with what should be done to ensure a healthy California ecosystem for all of our children and grandchildren, and not on what is politically expedient for individuals' short-term careers. I hope you vote to support a strong Bay Delta estuary and plan, and not watered down voluntary agreements. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up David Ragland.
All right. My name's David Ragland. I'm a civil engineer and land surveyor. Lived in California since I was 1 year old to where I'm 58 now. I think of my life as being lived on rivers. I lived on the Yuba as a child in Marysville and Yuba City. I worked in Yosemite National Park where I lived right on the Tuolumne River, and I still live in the Tuolumne drainage. And I fish and I swim in and I float the Tuolumne and the Merced and the Stanislaus rivers many times a year, every year. Growing up, my brother was a commercial salmon fisherman. And when that work became unavailable to him because the habitat decline caused it to be infeasible, his life took a terrible turn. It was a thing he knew how to do, and he could it was no longer available, and it was gone to him. I've watched these rivers change over the years. We used to be able to harvest wild fish, substantial numbers of them in the Feather and the Yuba. That's not appropriate anymore because of how difficult it is. But I want to point out that there are hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people who live in poor neighborhoods on these rivers. And I was lucky because my neighborhood was on the Feather River, and I could walk out to the Feather River and I could catch a salmon and I could see an otter. Now, there are whole regions of this state where the irrigation districts have completely dried the rivers. And if I lived on the banks of the Fresno River or on the banks of the Kings or Kern down in the valley, I don't know what I would have done. Down in the valley, of course, where they don't flow to their terminuses anymore. I don't know what I would have done. And it's a whole different transformative thing for people, for neighborhoods, for tribes to have healthy rivers versus stagnant, interconnected, or not interconnected ponds, or just dry washes. It's a whole different life. I've been working on these meetings and been an advisor to Tuolumne River Trust for a long time. I've attended a number of their events. I was there when your predecessors, including Felicia Marcus, said we were going ahead with a portion of unimpaired process. Now, the Tuolumne River water, it falls on my house and it drains to the Tuolumne River. And what I see that happens downstream is amazing. In June, for instance, sometimes the two major irrigation districts, Turlock and Modesto, they leave less than 10% in there, close to 5% sometimes. In that
Mr. Regland, I apologize. Just want to try to make sure we're being respectful of folks' time. I know we have to try to get through additional folks, so just kind of seeing if you can try to wrap it.
More words. The voluntary agreements won't work. We need people to catch and help us use water, but they stand to directly profit by destroying rivers, and it just doesn't work to put them in charge. We have to have the unimpaired model, not the VA model. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up Christopher Kroll. Mr. Kroll.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking my testimony today, and I realize you've had a long day, so I'll try to be very quick. I'm a resident of Berkeley at the bottom of the the Bay Delta system. I'm very concerned about the health of this system. And based on my experience, my career experience in government, as someone said earlier, you all are a regulatory agency. Voluntary agreements is not part of being a regulatory agency. That's politics. That is not what should be pursued by a regulatory agency, which needs to protect the resources for which you have been charged. So I urge you to not proceed with any support of any kind of voluntary agreement. This process requires regulation, which is what the state board and the regional boards that work under you will need to then implement and oversee. So please do not agree to voluntary agreements which have no place in a regulated system, which is, as you all know, you've talked about the complexity. There is no place for voluntary agreements in this system. Number two, the science is also very clear. We know what needs to happen. The system is collapsing. Climate change is only making it worse. We all know that at least 65% of the freshwater flow needs to make it to the system. This is not rocket science. Everybody knows this. this is what you need to do. This is what I strongly urge you to make a finding. Big ag, as someone said earlier, has to adjust to the 21st century realities of reduced water. It's not going to be like we're going to choose big ag and let the estuary completely Bay Delta system die. That cannot be the attitude of the state board. Big ag has to adjust, and the freshwater flows need to stay at what science has told us, at least 65%. And finally, well, actually, that is my final point. We are in a day and age of massive environmental change and ecological collapse. You all have the keys to saving the Bay Delta system, and I really strongly urge you to do that now and to do that as soon as possible. And I thank you for your participation in this process, but the way forward is very clear. No voluntary agreements, and at least 65% flow has to make it from the top to the bottom, or we're going to lose the Bay Delta, the largest estuary on the West Coast. Thank you very much for your time.
Next, I'd like to call up Stephen White.
First of all, I'd like to say that I start out by opposing the voluntary agreements. They are totally insufficient to deal with the recovery of the Delta and basically maintain a freshwater system in the state. They don't maintain the flows at anywhere near reasonable levels. This is seen in a number of diagrams that they present, and they're presented in the State Water Board's reports. Table G3A11 and G3A10 show that you get about 1 to 1.5% extra with the VAs. And at other times, in other water years, you actually see less, up to 11 or 14% less water. So they don't really provide much water, even at the best of times. The reason that increased flows are needed, and I'd say at the minimum, the 55% uninhibited or unimpaired flow, is you need to present this water not just for the salmon, although that's important, and the smelt, that's important, but there's so many fish that are endangered, sturgeon, steelhead, and then other species, mollusks, birds, water birds, mammals that live in the Delta. It's an ecosystem, and they all require a healthy system, and that system needs water, period. The water is also needed to stop the water intrusion, the saltwater intrusion, and that's going to get worse as sea level rises and climate change gets worse. There's no way you can reduce flows into the Delta. You need the increased flows to get rid of the nutrients that are flowing off into the Delta from agriculture and urban runoff and so on. No way will that happen if you reduce or even maintain the current levels of flow. You're just going to create more problems. There's no way that the VAs say that they're presenting making all this money available for purchasing water when really it's a $2.9 billion bill to the taxpayers to pay for that program. So they give a little money, we give a whole lot. They get a sweet deal, and we get a destroyed Delta. We cannot continue with this program. It has to go to at least 55% unimpaired flows, and use the adaptive program as a way to massage around that number. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up Amy Stroud.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the State Water Resources Control Board, for letting me speak. I'm calling in from Los Altos Hills. I work seasonally with Friends of the River. I'm also on the board of directors of PARC, which stands for Protect the American River Canyon. Today, I am before you as a fifth-generation California girl, representing only my own feelings and perspectives. I love rivers. Flowing with the river, following her current as it peaks over waves and meanders around boulders, soothes my soul. It is where my community gathers and paid for my MBA while I worked as a professional river guide. My curriculum vitae says I've experienced 27 rivers. Each one of those rivers is unique in habitat, smell, and rapids, but what they all have in common is a river needs water. I've watched these proceedings on November 20th, 22nd, and December 3rd. I've heard conflicting versions of the best available science, the various ways beneficial uses are interpreted, and the many current and proposed mitigation projects. What I know in my heart is that rivers have important jobs to do. They transport sediment, nutrients, organic material, and native fish. I've seen how healthy river flows support plant and animal communities, abundant insect life, and a wide variety of waterfowl. Plus, if California rivers can get there, they support this country's most diverse and protective ecosystem, the battle-scarred Delta estuary. 1.5 centuries of controlled, diverted, and exploited river flows has worked against these natural river processes, depleting California of the magic and beauty of her healthy ecosystems. Mitigation seems simple. Let fresh water flow, flood, and move in our natural river channels. And I say that with respect for the complexities of regenerating ecosystems on the knife edge of extinction. FOR Volunteer River Guides and myself provide river trips for tribal members. I feel humbled by how much we have learned about rivers from them. Their knowledge and respect comes from successful environmental stewardship from the beginning of time. The fact that the VAs excluded this knowledge from their best available science is appalling to me. I heard a representative for the VA say, "We all want the same thing." I assume he meant a desired outcome of healthy California rivers and Delta estuary. While that might be true, the purpose of water diverters and the purpose by law of the State Water Resources Control Board are not the same, and the methods of achieving the desired outcome are vastly different. In summary, this California girl is asking the State Water Resources Control Board to reject the VAs and follow a plan that serves your purpose, a plan you can control and regulate and includes the best available science. Thank you for listening to me and to everyone.
Next, I'd like to call up Carolyn Chang.
I just want to add my voice to those who have already spoke in terms of urging you to adopt a program of implementation for the Bay Delta plan that has flow requirements that are sufficient to support healthy ecosystems throughout the Bay Delta, as well as to reject the voluntary agreements, as I don't believe at this point in time that they would achieve the flow necessary to have healthy ecosystems. I guess just to share a little bit about myself, I have lived in California, here in the Bay Area for my whole life. I'm in Contra Costa County, just slightly west of the Delta. I'm also, a young person that's also, incredibly concerned about my future and generations coming after me, what kind of world we're inheriting and will go into with climate change and, ecological collapse, since Spanish colonization and now accelerating even more. I think many people here have spoken to those concerns. And so just urging you, to follow your obligation, as the State Water Board to, protect our communities and ecosystems that we all depend on for our livelihood, for our health. Having strong ecosystems, strong species really just makes us so much more resilient to, face these challenges. So we really need to ensure that ecosystem health is protected, and that is and water quality, which is, the obligation of the State Water Board. So encouraging, like others have said, making sure that there's flows, 60% or more through freshwater flows through the Bay Delta system. That's really necessary for, communities and ecosystems there to thrive that really have been, neglected and suffering from, ecological and economic impacts due to this kind of collapsing ecosystem. So just wanted to say that. And then, going with a plan that, includes tribal environmental justice and Delta interests instead of, VAs, which have excluded them. So just want to say that. And then lastly, I also work for the Sierra Club in the San Francisco Bay Area, which represents the Delta as well as other Bay Area counties. And we also work closely with Sierra Club California, which has adopted the same policy and stance regarding the Delta flows, and they represent, all of California and members across California, which, as as well. So just saying, yeah, just wanting to say, we've also, carefully considered this policy and our stance as well, and how that would affect, all of our members and communities across California. And we believe that adopting a Bay Delta plan, which has, these increased freshwater flows, would be the best approach, not only, speaking for myself, representing the Bay Area and the Delta areas of the Sierra Club, but also all of our members across California as well. So thanks for hearing my comment.
Next, I'd like to call up Glenn Spain.
My name is Glenn Spain. As you probably know, I am the Northwest Regional Director and General Legal Counsel for Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. That pictured back of me is one of many ports that our members fish in, and they're working on our 5th generation of family fishing operations. Many of them have sustained their livelihoods through salmon, but there are no salmon. There's no salmon this year. There's no salmon last year. There may not be any salmon next year in our fishery. There are too few of them surviving in the system, even to get out of the river system into the ocean to provide a fishery. That's where we are. I want to hit 4 high points here in the interest of time. One is that this system is grossly overappropriated. I think you all know that. I refer you to the only scientific peer-reviewed study of the water rights system that's been done to date, UC Davis, 2014, Grantham and Veers, and it's been disastrous. The goal must be recovery, not just checking off a box saying we've got minimum belly scraping flows, we meet the ESA needs. As you all should know, the ESA requires only the smallest amount of water to maintain the very existence to prevent extinction. It's not recovery. The recovery effort here is enormous, and the opportunity is enormous. Investing in watersheds, investing in salmon is an investment, not a cost. The cost of doing nothing is very high, but the investment return for moving forward with unimpaired flows and VAs in some combination is very, very large. The potential is $5.7 billion in economic returns if we had a restored fishery, supporting over 94,000 jobs, mostly in California. The other problem is that there is, and I was hearing a lot of, okay, us versus them. It's much more complex than that. The VAs and the unimpaired flows are not opposed. They're not an either-or choice. What the unimpaired flow systems do is provide a goal. And once the goals are met on biological basis for recovery benefits, then the VAs come into being as viable ways to minimize the impacts and maximize the progress toward those goals. So it's a false dichotomy to think that they're opposed. And the final is that we need to have an enforceable situation. We are in favor of 1707 in-stream water rights. And I want to close with 2 things here. 2 quotable quotes, one from board member Firestone. The goal is more water that the fish will see, not more water in a model, but that the fish actually use. And Mr. Schutz and Mr. Rees, I think, characterize the VAs very well. Very little water with a very complex process, quote unquote. I'd like to see the healthy rivers and landscapes actually be about healthy rivers and landscapes and not about dodging the requirement that we all know must be imposed sometime soon to put enough water in the system to protect our resources. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Stephen Schramm.
Yeah, my name's Steve Schramm from Petaluma, California. I'm a retired molecular biologist, current small business owner, and been an avid recreational angler all my life. I'm here to request that the State Water Board adopt an updated Bay Delta plan based on the unimpaired flow approach to most closely mimic natural flows through the Central Valley rivers and through the Delta. I noticed in listening today that the voluntary agreement has been rebranded as the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes. But I did look up the meaning of the word voluntary, and it means to choose by free will. I think anybody that's read the classics or the Bible knows what a double-edged sword free will is. I don't drive a car in the state of California by free will. I got to have a license and follow measurable rules. Same thing for my auto insurance. It's not by choice, by free will. It's mandated by the state. Normally, I would be very permissive as an individual, kind of soft-hearted and easygoing. But I think for salmon in the state of California, it's clutch. It's, the final countdown, the 2-minute warning, bottom of the ninth with 2 strikes. We need to have something that's mandated with an approach that includes necessary and enforceable temperature protections. A couple of anecdotes about salmon in the last 2 years. One, there's been no salmon fishing recreationally. I know there's been habitat restoration on the American River, but when there's no flow and salmon smolt have to be trucked down to the bay, and now they're returning to the creeks that they've never been in before because they lack imprinting, and they're probably going to die there without spawning successfully because these are intermittent creeks that aren't going to have enough flow. That there's a problem with the system. The other thing I would say is there's a great 12,000 square foot tackle shop up in Rohnert Park, California. I go in there now, and in the last 2 years, they've lost 40% of their revenue because salmon season's been closed. I think about if my income was reduced by 40%, what a devastating effect that would be on me and my family. It's tough to see this place going down the drain. It's been 2 years. It looks like it's going to be 3 years, and I'm not sure that they're going to be around. And that's one of the last big independent tackle shops in Northern California. The other thing I would say is during the 4th of July weekend this year, we tried to get together with family and take the kids out to the river. And one of the things that the park ranger said when we were trying to make a camping reservation was, be aware we may have an algal bloom. That tells me that, voluntary agreements and the supervised decay of salmon populations that we've had in California for the last 100 years, it's just not working. It's time to, really put the pedal to the metal and follow the unimpaired flow. The last thing I would say is when I moved to the North Bay 25 years ago, I went to a NOAA discussion of salmonid populations on the West Coast. And it was much like today. There were a lot of discussion and presentations by recreational anglers, commercial anglers, government officials, biologists, interested business entities. But at the end of the comment section, the most powerful comment that I heard was by an elderly woman who said that she lived on the river all her life. And during the Depression, when the government couldn't do anything for the people, that there were so many salmon in the river that a man was able to walk out knee deep, throw his arms through the gills of a salmon and feed his family. I think the unimpaired flow model is the way to go, both scientifically
Thank you,
and
Mr. Schramm.
ecologically, and that it's also a moral obligation. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Carol Ruth.
Hello, this is Carol Ruth. Thank you very much for hearing my comments tonight, and also for all the hard work you are putting into this project. The State Water Board's update on the Water Quality Control Plan for the Bay Delta is one of the best opportunities we have to save the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary and the fish and the wildlife that it supports. It's imperative that the board set water quality protocols in the plan that will both protect beneficial uses of water as well as provide a method of implementation that will guarantee that those objectives are achieved. Last month, I paddled down the Tuolumne River with other members of the Tuolumne River Trust during the fall salmon migration period. We saw several good habitat restoration projects providing gravel spawning areas that have been created there recently. However, what we did not see the day that we were there were salmon, not one. And contrast that sharply with a family rafting trip that my family took in the 90s down the Trinity River when there were so many salmon underneath our rafts, we couldn't begin to count them all. So the solution is simple. We must start to provide enough water to keep the river at the cooler temperatures needed for spawning. Otherwise, our fish will continue to decline and the salmon fishery season will be closed permanently. The voluntary agreements that are being considered do not meet the challenge. They would maintain or even worsen the unsustainable status quo and delay attainment of the salmon doubling objective until 2050. And they would be free of meaningful oversight by the board for the next 8 years or more. I asked the board to consider adopting a program of implementation that requires all water users to meet the flow requirements that achieve salmon doubling and native fish viability by dramatically increasing flows to and through the Delta to the San Francisco Bay. I respectfully ask the board to reject the Newsom administration's proposed voluntary agreements. It is time to address and correct this urgent problem now. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up Maggie, be followed by Eric Holthouse, Lynn McBride, Mariah.
Oh, hi. I'm Maggie. I think my video is not working from my computer so well. I want to appreciate the board so much for staying so late and for providing so much information, and also to all the people who have commented. I want to appreciate all the people who have provided commentary before me. They're so articulate and have expressed so many of my concerns much better than I can. From what I've learned in this discussion, I understand that the board's assignment is to preserve, enhance, and restore the Bay Delta for future generations. And I want to throw in my hat to the support for increasing the flows to protect wildlife, to restore salmon habitat, and also for the very important migratory flyway for birds that reside in the area year-round, as well as those that are passing through. If we let our ecosystems collapse, we're done. And there's so much more to be said, but I just would like to encourage the board to reject the proposed voluntary agreements and to adopt the implementation that requires all water users to meet flow standards that achieve salmon habitat, native fish viability, and the water quality objectives. Thank you so much. I appreciate what you're doing.
Next, I'd like to call up Mariah Lauritsen.
I'm Mariah Lauritsen with the GSSA. I wanted to comment on behalf of salmon and the fishing community. In achieving a goal, there are always leading and lagging factors. Leading factors can be the temperature and water flows in our rivers. Lagging factors can be the crashing salmon populations, as well as canceling the commercial fishing seasons for 2 years in a row. We are experiencing both negative leading and lagging factors in the goal of 1, having a viable fishing industry, and 2, preventing the extinction of salmon runs. Even for hatcheries, Coleman had to borrow salmon eggs from East Bay mud. The impact of the collapse of salmon is felt by community members every day. Imagine having your livelihood just get canceled for 2 years in a row. The current state of salmon and the fishing industry demands to be addressed with urgency. As such, I ask you to act with urgency in creating an environment where salmon can thrive. The best available science shows that the viability of native fish populations and the health of the ecosystem is strongly linked to the amount and timing of freshwater flow. I appreciated Member McGuire speaking in terms of viability of different options today. The fishing industry needs the support from the Water Board to be and have viability. I also appreciate Member Firestone and emphasizing the need for fish to see more water. It is a need, otherwise we won't have fish. Please consider unimpaired flows to ensure the viability of native fish populations. And please move quickly to ensure the revival of salmon populations, both to help the fish and also help our communities. Thank you for your time.
Next, I'd like to call up John Rosa Pepe.
My name's John Rose Pepe. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not my work thing popped up. So I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I was lucky to grow up fishing with my parents and my grandparents. I was a fisheries biologist, later did some commercial fishing. I swim, canoe, raft in rivers. I came late to the Bay Delta area, didn't get here till 1988. And in the short time, I've watched salmon basically disappear, as people have talked about. 2 fishing seasons not available. Algal blooms. What we need from the board is our large-scale increases in flow to San Francisco Bay, ideally on the scale of 60 to 70%, to ensure viable native fish populations, provide suitable temperatures for spawning and rearing, and prevent toxic algal blooms. I've watched today people switch from talking about voluntary agreements to rebranding to healthy rivers. This is greenwashing. Where you have all the nice buzzwords, holistic, sustainability, symbiotic. But fish need water, and these voluntary agreements don't do that. They ignore the best available science. They let water users off the hook for providing meaningful flow increases to protect the Bay Delta or for paying fully for habitat restoration projects. These voluntary agreements would also delay attainment of the salmon doubling objective to 2050. They've excluded tribal, environmental justice, and Delta interests from the table. And they would be free of meaningful oversight by the board for 8 years or more. We've already seen algal bloom, salmon, and we can't wait another 8 years. The board should adopt a program of implementation that requires all water users to meet flow requirements that achieve salmon doubling, native fish viability, and other water quality objectives by dramatically increasing flows to and through the Delta to San Francisco Bay. And the board needs to reject the nuisance administrative proposed voluntary agreements, not healthy rivers, and any other proposals that would not achieve the narrative and numeric water quality objectives developed by the board that would require up to 65% of unimpaired flow. In closing, I'd like to thank the board for giving me an opportunity to talk tonight and staying with us. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up Wesley Chong.
Hello. My name is Wesley Chong. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a concerned citizen of California. And I'm urging the board today to support a Bay Delta plan that is based on the best available science and not the VAs, which were agreed upon by agribusinesses and cities that have been using more water to grow their population and discretionary economic activities since the start of the destruction of the environment since settler colonialism, which is not how we balance the needs of present day and future generations and other species that we share our planet with. So it's disingenuous to say that we're balancing environment and economic activities when the environment has always been one of the last things that we care about through our actions. And unimpaired flows would be restorative justice for the tribes, wildlife like the salmon and other species that we have been killing for hundreds of years. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Next, I'd like to call up Thomas Daniel.
Hi, actually, this is Mary Butterwick. I'm plugged in on Tom's computer, so that's why.
Okay, we appreciate that clarification. We'll connect you to the name that we have as well here. So thank you. Good evening.
I'm a resident of San Francisco, and I'm here this evening because the Sacramento River and Bay Delta are in ecological crisis due mainly to inadequate flow releases. Native fish and wildlife populations are crashing, some to the brink of extinction. Salmon populations are in severe decline, so much so that the commercial fishing season has been closed 3 times in the last 15 years and will likely be closed again next year. Toxic algal blooms in the Delta have continued to get worse. These dire conditions all indicate that the reasonable protection of beneficial uses is not being achieved here. The best available science shows that health of the ecosystem is strongly linked to the amount and time of freshwater flow. Currently, over 50% of the runoff that would naturally flow to San Francisco Bay is diverted before it reaches the Delta, or is exported directly from the Delta by the giant state and federal water projects. According to the State Water Board's 2010 Flow Criteria Report, 75% of unimpaired flow would be needed to protect the Bay Delta ecosystem. Clearly, substantial increases of freshwater flows to San Francisco Bay are needed to ensure viable native fish populations, provide suitable temperatures for spawning and rearing, prevent toxic algal blooms, support sustainable fisheries, and protect tribal beneficial uses. The voluntary agreements prepared by water users and the Newsom administration cannot achieve the objectives of the Bay Delta Plan because they would produce very little new water. Instead, these VAs rely heavily on non-flow measures such as habitat restoration and invasive predator management. However, in the absence of sufficient flows, these non-flow measures will not work. I am concerned that the VAs would maintain or even worsen the unsustainable status quo. This is not the direction we need to be taking here. It appears that these VAs are essentially a delay tactic by water agencies to avoid the difficult decisions regarding the reasonable use of water in an over-appropriated system. I urge the board to reject the Newsom administration's proposed VAs and any other proposals that would not achieve the narrative and numeric water quality objectives developed by the board that would require up to 65% of unimpaired flow. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call up, we just have the initials here, BWF.
In order to have a healthy San Francisco Bay Delta estuary, this board must reject the Newsom administration's proposed voluntary agreements. I am Barbara Folter. I apologize for my initials on my square. I'm a 54-year San Francisco resident, and I've seen what reduced flows have done to the San Francisco Bay Delta. Signs are more frequently being posted saying not to eat the fish caught in the bay or even swim in the bay. We need more fresh water in the bay. Salmon was once a fish I could enjoy without worrying about its demise. The salmon season has been closed 3 times in the last 15 years, as many other people have said. Salmon need cool water, as many of the speakers have pointed out. Less water will not provide that. These problems and many, many more are all the result of less water flowing into the San Francisco Bay from both the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers and their tributaries. 65% unimpaired flow is necessary to keep this ecosystem healthy. There is just no other way. The voluntary agreements ignore the best available science, according to both the state and federal agencies. I implore you to take these reports seriously. The creation of the disastrous tunnel to Southern California would take even more away from our estuary forever. The tunnel is planned to go through Staten Island and disturb the roosting areas of the greater sandhill cranes and other migratory birds. Staten Island was set aside as a preserve for the cranes in 2001 when the Nature Conservancy purchased the island. TNC says it is quote unquote critical habitat. There are multiple species of birds who would be affected by the years and years of construction. If you have not been to this island at dawn or dusk when the birds rise from or return to their nighttime roost, I would be very happy to take you there myself. It's a life-changing experience and one that you would take away from future generations by your actions if you reduce the unimpaired flow below 65%. The VAs will not make things better. Thank you very much for giving me this time.
And now our last commenters, I understand here, and please do raise your hand if it's otherwise. Jeffrey Hook.
First of all, I want to thank you for running this meeting with the immense patience and respect that you've shown everyone throughout this workshop. I'm really impressed, and thank you very much for that. My name is Jeffrey Hook. I'm an amateur ecologist. I live in Palo Alto, and I want to offer a kind of 50,000-foot ecological perspective, because if I'm in the position of setting policy, I always want to start from the really fundamental principles that have to do with a finite Earth, carrying capacity, thermodynamics, humans' desire for for unsustainable growth, and these kinds of things. Because if you fail to address fundamental principles, you end up making a mess that just compounds with every year. So a previous speaker, and this is now hours ago, said to keep it simple and transparent. So here are some simple and transparent facts from the perspective of an ecologist. 1, 8.5 billion people on the planet is unprecedented, and a mountain of evidence indicates this level is unsustainable, especially at anything like the lifestyle of the average person in the US. 50 years ago, there were half as many of us. 100 years ago, there were a quarter as many. Fact number 2, California's population has followed this global trend. Currently 39 million, 50 years ago, about half at 21 million. 100 years ago, we were only about 3 million. Fact number 3, historically, an estimated 5.5 million salmon returned to California's rivers. Since the 1950s, less than 500,000 fish on average are counted. The increase in population and the decrease in salmon are causally linked. Fact number 4, the desire to protect salmon is not just motivated by aesthetics or empathy for the fish. When salmon swim upstream from the ocean to their spawning grounds and die, they bring nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients to the land. They are, in fact, a giant nutrient train that works for free. The nutrients benefit the plants and animals in the watershed. When the watershed is healthy, it benefits the agricultural and municipal water systems that draw from it. Humans need nature to work for us. We are delusional to pretend otherwise. Next fact, salmon need the 65% unimpaired streamflow standard in the Bay Delta plan. Next fact, salmon need cold water. Building artificial sandbars in shallow, low-flow riverbeds results in water that's too hot. Put a salmon in a hot tub, it will die. Next fact, California is a semi-desert, yet we grow 20% of the nation's rice. Rice needs 5 acre-feet per acre per year. By contrast, quinoa needs 5/6 of an acre-foot. by converting the state's 500,000 acres of rice to quinoa, we could net 2 million acre feet per year. For reference, the entire flow of the Feather River is about 7 million acre feet. Next fact, it's common sense to reduce the human footprint, both our numbers and the resource demand per person. This is not at all irrational, any more than the desire of an overweight person to lose weight. It is delusional to pursue a strategy of continuous growth in a finite system. This is not rocket science. The sooner we act to reduce our human footprint to further long-term common good, the more satisfied we and future generations will be. And then I want to note that every speaker who spoke in favor of the VA or HRL is advocating for a narrow interest, a narrow constituency, even if it's for several 100,000 people. They're asking for growth that has been unsustainable for a long, long time and is nothing short of ludicrous now. Whereas every speaker...
Thank you, Mr. Hook.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If you want to finish your point, but do want to be able to keep time here. So thank you.
I just have one more sentence.
Okay, that works. Thank you.
Yeah. Every speaker who has spoken in favor of the Bay Delta plan has advocated for long-term common good. I think that dichotomy is really palpable. Thank you so much for, again, your patience. I know this is difficult decision and not everyone's going to be satisfied with the outcome.